In the year of our Komi 2022, being an anime fan is not the guilt-ridden, shameful thing it once was. At least not as it felt like it was back when I was growing up. Anime was part of a niche market that was new and bizarre to America, and due to maybe some questionable and just plain out there IPs that were brought to the States, anyone outed for being an anime fan would get labeled as a pervert, nerd, or outsider. But now, it has become so widely accepted in pulp culture that finding anyone scared or ashamed to admit they like anime is almost unheard of. But that doesn't mean in our own otaku community that we don't have some guilty pleasures. And I don't mean as in poorly made anime that we still like. I mean the shows that can give a bad impression on the person who enjoys them. For me, my guilty pleasure is Don't Toy With Me, Miss Nagatoro. And I put it at number 8 on my top anime of 2021 list, so I guess I'm not that guilt-ridden about it. And if you're one of those people who were offended to find it on that list, you have every right to be. No, I totally get it. Because I was like that at one time too. When I first skimmed the manga years ago, I was just as offended as others were at the way Nagatoro bullied the main protagonist in the first scene. I just thought the manga was some masochistic ecchi filth. Which, to be frank, it is. At least at first. Like I expressed in my other video about this show, the thing that made me take a second look was this moment in the trailer.
私1年だけど、2年? じゃあ、先輩ですね.
It was this oddly kind sound coming out of Nagatoro here. It made me read back on the manga and really analyze it. And in the process, I discovered over time the relationship between her and our, for a time, nameless protagonist goes from abusive to somewhat more harmless. Now, some of you are going to make fun of me and say this show is just to appease some sort of bullying fetish, which I don't have. I don't. I honestly don't think the show is for that masochistic kink everyone says it is. But Ko, she's looking directly at the viewer when teasing. That's exactly what this show is. Here's the funny thing about that claim. Yes, in episode 1, the total individual shots of Nagatoro looking directly at the audience, even in the moments that were not technically teasing, was about 12 times. In episode 2, that number dropped directly in half. And by episode 3, it was only 3 times. And episode 4 was about 5 times. Okay, so that number's going to fluctuate, but honestly, if we compare the amount of times we see her looking directly at us to the time she's looking at Senpai while we are observing, the latter is far more frequent. Even times that you would argue she's looking at us, technically she's looking to the side towards Senpai. But enough being on the defensive, let me just explain why I ended up liking this show. You see, I do agree with the majority that Nagatoro is at least at the start abusive. There is something to debate about consent on how Senpai is forced into these situations he doesn't want to be in. I've seen many people make good points about how differently this show would be looked at if the roles were reversed. If it was a man forcing a girl into sexual situations to belittle or tease them, he would very deservedly be called a predator, dangerous, evil. If you're one of those people that feel that way about Nagatoro, I totally can see where you're coming from, especially from that first attack. Episode 1 may possibly have the most difficult barrier to entry to any show, specifically for that scene. So yes, Nagatoro does seem to be downright evil. On the other hand... Does she really look like a threat to you? Like, the more and more I watch, the less and less awful she seems. I think some of it comes from the tone the voice actress Sumire Uesaka gives to Nagatoro in certain moments. In the first act, you can hear that mean-spirited mocking tone she is giving. Yet, look at the words on screen right after that attack. You can think from how they read and her expression that she is still mocking him, but...
それあげます。いじっちゃったお詫び。じゃあね、先輩。
It just sounds friendlier. And don't get me wrong, the argument that Nagatoro's actions are still just as problematic is a good one, and if you feel that way, I'm not going to try to change your mind about that. It will come down to how you feel about certain situations. Like in this scene where Nagatoro is mocking Senpai on his vampire manga he's reading by pretending to be a vampire and threatening to bite his neck. Some will see this as sexual assault and problematic. The rest are probably submissive bottoms who would love to get dominated and get off on this scene. I mean, let's just be real. But me finding her to be less threatening was something I felt while reading the manga for the second time, and it shows even more in how you read her facial expressions sometimes. In fact, Senpai himself points this out in one scene.
また長瀞のお箱童貞いじり。いやしかしこいつだって結構照れ屋なとこあるのは知ってる。
He has a point. She does have that blushing expression every time she teases him. At first you can read this as her getting off on the power she has over him, but honestly in this scene of her teasing his nipples...
Oh god, I really just had to say that out loud, didn't I?
While she is doing it, you can read this as lustful power over him, but you could also read this as,
oh my god, how did I get myself into this?
One theory I have on this comes from a later scene where Senpai overhears another guy trying to hit on Nagatoro. Okay, maybe hitting on is the wrong word, but they are clearly being forward with her. One tries to impress her with his music, and the other makes this offhanded comment about touching breasts. Senpai is expecting Nagatoro to respond with insults and mockery because that's what she's always done to him. But her response...
よくわかんないっすね。難解というか。何も感じないっすね。あんまり本気で寄ってない感じ。違います？初対面でそういう話、ちょっとどうかと思いますけど。
I think maybe this is why Nagatoro was so interested in Senpai. Look at how these guys are so forward and direct with Nagatoro. Listen to any woman online and you'll hear the same story every time about how men seem to have no self-awareness and act too imposing or intimidating in how they interact with women. Sometimes this can be harmless as this scene, and sometimes it can get far worse. I imagine this is common for Nagatoro. She probably deals with guys like this all the time. It can be overwhelming. But then she meets Senpai, someone who keeps to himself, doesn't bother anyone, and...
先輩って怒らないんですか？私結構きついことしてると思いますけど。
Yeah. More on that later.
I started to see Nagatoro as a young child who doesn't know how to interact with someone like Senpai. Someone who is, for whatever reason, finds Senpai fascinating and is just using the bullying as some sort of control over her own emotions that she doesn't understand. Going back to that scene I mentioned earlier where Senpai notices how she is shy, here she is picking at him saying he was trying to get her alone to do sleazy things. Well, Senpai decides for the first time to call her out.
やらしいことってなんだよ。
やらしいことはやらしいことっすよ。
詳しく。
強引に抱きついたりとか、それからキスしたりとか。
The very fact, the first idea that comes to her head about what's considered sleazy is to be embraced suddenly and kissed. And that, to me, at least, reveals that Nagatoro is just the same as Senpai. She's a bashful virgin.
Again enforcing my view on her being just a young, ignorant child. But add that to the way boys have approached her, it kinda makes sense why she acts the way she does around Senpai and why she wants to hang with him. It's because with him, she feels more in control of the situation. Because of his timid nature, he's more likely not to do anything to her. Therefore, she feels at ease. Sure, her doing this leads to Senpai feeling uneased, but I will address some examples of growth in that field later. So Nagatoro starts off in a bad light, but does improve over time and becomes a lot of fun to watch. But what about our nameless protagonist Senpai? He's clearly a self-inserting character for an audience of lonely men, right? Hell, even Nagatoro points it out in one of Senpai's comics.
要するにこれ、チークフリートって先輩ですよね。
いや、そんなこと。
自分を投影した不遇な剣士が戦いの中で美しい女騎士と徐々に心を通わせ。
Well, yes, but so have a lot of other men in shows like this. That's to be expected, right? What's wrong with that? I mean, he's at least got to be the least problematic thing in the show, correct? Well, that's what I thought at first.
But I learned through one person's tweet about watching episode 1 that even Senpai starts off the show in a bad light. You see, in the manga, the first scene kind of goes by quickly with no real build-up or mood setting. But in the anime, we have more internal dialogue from Senpai on how he is feeling. He immediately assumes the girls are looking down on him as he enters the library, their faces turn to him in awkward silence. The framing shows how he thinks the girls, who he doesn't know, are thinking of him. And listen to what he is thinking in this moment.
まあ俺とは絶対に関わりのない人種だ。
Now, I can understand this and relate to this. I too, in my young school days, from constant bullying and being an outcast, I had the same feelings about girls, assuming no girl would ever be romantically interested in me, or hell, even platonically interested in me. But the problem lies in what he says before that.
苦手なタイプの女子。
What type of girls, dude? You've never met or talked with any of them before. Your only interaction with them is hearing them giggle and that awkward stare they gave you. How could you possibly know you're gonna hate them?
To immediately mark everyone to be against you is bad enough, but in this scene, it does show a bit of a misogynistic incel attitude. I mean, it also doesn't help that the girls actually mock him for his comic, and Nagatoro doing this shortly after also doesn't help with his outlook on women at this point. But it's something I just didn't realize when watching this for the first time, that anyone could find fault in the main guy of this anime. Some may say this is overthinking it, but with the rise of incels on the internet and the mindsets they promote, it's understandable why someone would look at it this way. So is Senpai a bad character?
Kazuya Kinoshita. That, for those of you who don't know, is a lead protagonist of a show called Rent a Girlfriend. And if you were smarter than me and didn't watch that show, trust me, you're going to have a hard time convincing me of any man in any rom-com show being a incel when you have to compare it to him. Now, I don't have time to go over everything about Kazuya or Rent a Girlfriend. I would suggest watching Mother's Basement's roast of the show, because he goes over great detail why Kazuya is so terrible.
Senpai does have a toxic mind, don't get me wrong, but when you really get down to it, he isn't trying to manipulate anyone. He doesn't try to gain sympathy from Nagatoro by going on about his sad life. In fact, I'm not entirely sure he even once mentions his past of dealing with bullies to her. His honest goal in life is not even to get a girlfriend. All he really wants to do is to keep to himself, to be left alone and just create, whether it's his comic or his art. And now what you may be thinking is, well, why doesn't she just leave him alone? And honestly, I had the same question. Why doesn't she? Wouldn't that have been better?
And then I asked myself another question that kind of made this whole story make an odd kind of sense. What good would that have done Senpai?
He was shutting himself off from everyone and everything. It was a defense mechanism from years of bullying. Nagatoro's comment about how he never gets angry or puts up a fight points out one flaw in Senpai's demeanor. He's so busy building defenses that he has no outside input on his behaviors or his personal growth. What would have become of him if he kept doing that? Would he just have grown into a NEET? Someone who never interacted with another soul? Untouched? Alone? Isolated?
And I know this sounds weird to bring up since Nagatoro started interacting with him by bullying and mocking him very viciously. But sometimes that's what it takes to break past someone's walls. I've actually had people do that for me in the past. They were cutting up, teasing me, and started off, I just hated them, but some of them actually grew on me. And the ways they challenged me in my own personal beliefs changed me and made me grow into someone better.
There's actually a very good example of this in the anime. In a scene where Nagatoro is trying to teach Senpai to start standing for himself after an incident with the friends in the cafeteria, They do a skit where she teases him and he is to softly slap her shoulder and say, "Cut that out." She does her teasing by mocking his hairstyle, but instead of doing that slap, he just stands there shaking and goes,
Okay, so I get some of you are going to find this a bit silly. I mean, she's mocked him for his comic, called him creepy, put him in non-consensual situations, and just invaded his personal space. And his limit is making fun of his hair? I get it. I agree with you, but that's not what we should focus on. What we should focus on is her reaction.
For the first time, we see this look of regret on Nagatoro's face, and it seems genuine. This is a significant moment of growth on Nagatoro's part because she's finally realizing her actions, but it's also a step forward for Senpai because in a small way he took a stand and set a boundary with her. And to Nagatoro's credit, she accepts it. And we get an example of the setting of boundaries again after Nagatoro shows Senpai a video of sheep getting sheared. She then points out Senpai's hair looks like a sheep's and starts trying to use shears on Senpai. But he protests just enough. The fact that she listened to him and backed off shows she is starting to care about Senpai's feelings, if just a little bit. Now, there's one thing I need to talk about. The one elephant-sized thing. Some of you already know about it from my last video talking about Nagatoro, and that's the author Nanashi and their past works. I say past works because I have not done any research on whether or not they are still doing them. But one thing many people love to bring up is Nanashi used to do adult doujins, and a lot of them had the lolicon tag. Now let me be clear on something, and I'm being 100% honest here, but the only research I did was going to one site, searching the author's name, clicking on any doujin whose front pages looked like they were Nanashi's art style, and checking the tags. I have not read any of these doujins and have no idea what anything looks like within any of these doujins, obviously because I don't want any of that in my browsing history. So I know nothing on how bad any of these doujins get. However, many people love to bring up what happens in one particular doujin involving a very unfortunate trip to the zoo. Again, never looked at it, but heard about it, and what I've heard is not fun. Yeah, so hearing about that alone tells me enough. Nanashi's past works are very screwed up, problematic, and just not something many people can just ignore when discussing his hit series Nagatoro, especially with fan service involving high schoolers. In fact, that is something else I need to bring up. I can't find it anymore, but a few days ago, from writing this, I saw a TikTok that was about not liking current anime rom-coms. There were some good examples of bad rom-com animes, such as Rent a Girlfriend and My First Girlfriend is a Gal, but then they had My Dress Up Darling and Nagatoro in the list as well. As I was holding back my urge to comment on how those last two were actually good, I looked down at the bottom text and it read, "Give me back Kimi Ni Todoke."
And I have never been more blindsided by anything in my life. 'Cause I now get why everyone has problems with rom-coms today.
Kimi Ni Todoke is my absolute favorite anime of all time. It's one of the most striking, funny, adorable, wholesome, and moving rom-com anime ever. It hooked me in years ago and captured my heart, and it doesn't contain one instance of fan service. No problematic elements, no boundary-pushing actions from the characters. It's just pure. And that's why people complain today about rom-coms. You will very rarely, if at all, find any of them today that fits this description. So many rom-coms today are filled with fan service or problematic elements from age differences or sometimes even worse. There are some cleaner ones out there, but even those have things that can appear problematic without context. Yes, she is short and looks extremely young, but they are both the same age, in the same school, in the same classroom. Please, for the love of God, get over it!
So, why am I trying to bother selling you on Don't Totally Me Miss Nagatoro? It starts off with an abusive bully and possibly misogynistic incel. It contains fan service of a teenage girl. It borders on masochistic ecchi filth. Why am I trying to sell you on this? Well, let me tell you about Yoshi.
No, not that Yoshi. This Yoshi. Okay, so sometimes the anime changes certain moments from the manga, and at times it kind of works and other times not so much. One time blew me away the more I thought about it. You see, by the end of the season, there's a challenge between Senpai and the head of the art club where they have to go head to head with their art. In the manga, it ends in a disqualification of the art club president, and it just ends on that note. But in the anime, they actually had Senpai and Nagatoro stand up for her. And that's where this anime did something insignificant but also incredible at the same time.
Yoshi! 変な目で見てる人いたけど、真剣に見てる人もすごくいっぱいいて、それってアメージング。
Now, this may seem pointless to bring up, but let me explain. Yoshi is a big fan favorite for the manga readers. Her thing is kind of a backup bully to another girl, and what she does most of the time is just parrot what the other girl says. Despite that, manga readers liked her and so did I. And the anime apparently realized that and gave her this moment. But the thing about that is, this is Yoshi's one big moment because she spoke for herself. She wasn't repeating what someone else was saying. This was her standing on her own. And honestly, I can't help but get teary-eyed over that, despite realizing that this isn't a significant scene. Except maybe what she says here actually sums up the show.
Yes, this anime is in a sense questionable, or to some just ecchi trash. And it is fair to say that's why some people are watching it. But some people are watching for something else.
For me, I really enjoyed watching Nagatoro and Senpai forming this unusual bond, and having read ahead in the manga, I can tell you it just gets better as time goes on, and they really stand for each other at times. Like when Senpai notices boys gawking at Nagatoro's sweaty shirt to see her bra, and he moves between them so they can't keep staring. Another time, he discovers Nagatoro and her friends being bothered once again by some random oculary challenge dudes. Senpai can tell the girls are not liking them and desperately wanting out, so Senpai does something rather bold, at least for him. He walks up to them bashfully. In his strongest voice, he goes, "Kaero!" Though the guys aren't impressed, Nagatoro, on the other hand,
Senpai.
She gets up and leaves with the other girls, who all walk home with Senpai. Like, I could talk for days how amazing this scene is, from Senpai giving Nagatoro a way out of an uncomfortable situation, to Nagatoro's clear joy and pride she shows in Senpai's actions. But let me just point out one thing people like Senpai probably don't understand. Yeah, he's a loner, a loser, and yeah, that. But here he is walking with 4 pretty girls. Sure, arguably none of them are romantically interested in him, but they feel safe with him. They are far more comfortable with him than they were with the other dudes. And honestly, if guys try to be like Senpai here, making women feel comfortable and safe, things would be so much better. As for Nagatoro, I can think of 2 good moments this season of her standing up for Senpai. First is the cafeteria scene where her friends are teasing him and Nagatoro puts a stop to it when one girl starts actually questioning Senpai's manliness. We'll admit that's a bit inconsistent because Nagatoro has made fun of him for being weak for a man. But the other moment is when the art club president is threatening to close the club because Senpai is clearly not taking the club seriously. By the way, I love the music here. It's my absolute favorite from the soundtrack. It's called Netsui, which means enthusiasm, and it has been used a few times.
Though, oddly, the first time we hear this track is right after the first attack scene.
後輩の女子に泣かされた。
Huh. Thought it started there, but whatever.
勝手にやる気がないとか決めつけないでくださいよ。先輩は一人でもずっとクソ真面目に書いてましたよ。
What a powerful scene! From the glimpse of how Nagatoro looked at Senpai while he was doing his art, to the music swell, everything so wonderful about it. All for us to collectively at the same time yell at our screens, "What the hell is a keener?"
Okay, let me look this up. A person who is extremely eager, zealous, or enthusiastic? So, Nagatoro just defended Senpai because he is enthusiastic about his art, over a track whose name means enthusiasm. And wait, that track's first notes were after she first bullied him. Is this track's placement indicating the rise of enthusiasm in Senpai there? Or maybe in Nagatoro?
Now I'm sounding like an exclamation point. Go figure.
One thing I want to say as a defense to loving the show, despite all problematic things within and related to the author, is something Tony Gomark once said. He made a video discussing the recent changes to the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, playing the two sides of the debate, the ones who praised it and the ones who complained it was censorship. Towards the end, Tony interrupts the debate to say this.
Just because a work of art is problematic doesn't mean it's not good. And just because it's good doesn't mean it's not problematic. Sometimes, I dare say even most of the time, what you like is just what you like. No more, no less. Just because someone's criticizing a thing you like doesn't mean they're attacking you. And it certainly doesn't give you an excuse to attack back.
Sometimes what you like is just what you like. And my friends can attest that I'm horrible at following that advice in that clip. I don't handle well concerns of criticism of things I like. But yeah, as much as I like Nagatoro, I have to admit there are things that others may take issue with. And I can only hope to those who have those issues can listen to me explain why I still like the show and give it a chance.
So, that's kind of why the story of Don't Toy With Me, Miss Nagatoro resonates with me so much. The idea of a story that starts on a very sadistic, manipulative action that grows into a wholesome, budding friendship that is such a strange process and, of course, not at all realistic, but that's basically why we watched fiction in the first place, isn't it? To escape from what we don't like about our own realities. To live vicariously through these characters. So please, believe me when I tell you that Don't Toy With Me, Miss Nagatoro is not something to judge only on face value.
And season 2's coming out soon, and that should contain some of the better parts of the manga, and... Wait. They're saying they changed animation studios? Why? Alright, let's see who they changed it to. OLM. OLM. The same people that did Komi Can't Communicate. Which had scenes like... Season 2 is going to be...